Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. We are so glad that you're spending time on your Wednesday to visit with us here virtually, and Jay Ferguson, all about virtual learning and leading. We know that this has been a difficult time for all of us, but especially you as Christian educators, whether you're in higher education or secondary education. It is a bizarre and unique time, but also an amazing opportunity to pivot and shift and be the best leaders that we can be. And so that's what we're going to dive in to learn about today. A couple of housekeeping announcements before we get started with Jay. First of all, it's so cool to see where all of you are joining us from. We've got Courtney from Franklin, David from Michigan, and Harry from Mountain Lake Christian Schools. Hi, Mountain Lake. We love you guys up there in Minnesota. We are doing an updated Facebook Live today at 1 o'clock Central Time. A lot of you who are on this webinar today probably have a lot of questions about the CARES Act, specifically the Paycheck Protection Program. And your questions are fantastic, and we want to answer as many of them as we can. But we're actually going to be doing that on Facebook today. It's Facebook Live. I know it's a little bit confusing, webinars versus Facebook Live. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the announcements feature here on GoToWebinar. That is the link. You can click that and then click Get Reminder. And Facebook will remind you at 1 o'clock today to go Central Time to go live with us, where our COO, Sutton Turner, and myself will be answering as many questions as we can. There have been a couple of updates since our last Facebook Live on Monday. So we want to make sure everybody that can join that, as we'll be going over questions about contractors and the Civil Rights Clause and all of that there. I also want to send you guys our hub for Christian schools during COVID-19. So I'm going to type that right now in the announcement box there. It's www.schoolcovid19.com. That's where we are putting all of our replays of our Vanderbloemen Network live for schools, as well as the ACSI resource hub for COVID-19. The AISC, I'm getting all my acronyms confused. Anyway, it's all there on that page where you can go and get access to as many of the school-specific resources. CCCU resources also there. So that is www.schoolcovid19.com. I also want to invite you during our time today. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. We have loved seeing all the questions that come in during these webinars. So we're going to put Jay hard to work answering your questions today. And you can do that in the questions panel of your GoToWebinar control panel. So send them my way, and I will be monitoring those throughout our webinar today. All right, well, let's jump in. I am Holly Tate. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Vanderbloemen. And at Vanderbloemen, we help Christian schools and churches and ministries with staffing and succession planning. So staffing and succession planning. And my colleague, Brian Jensen, is our executive search consultant who spends his days specifically serving schools. And so, Brian, if you'll give everybody a little wave. We are so glad that you are here. I'll let you introduce yourself quickly so that folks get to hear from you and what you do at Vanderbloemen.
Very excited to be with everybody this morning. As Holly mentioned, my name is Brian Jensen. My background, I have 15 years in Christian education, all at the higher education level. I worked at 2 different universities over 15 years. Most recently, was the Vice President of Student Development at Geneva College, just north of Pittsburgh, and enjoyed my time there. And then I've been with Vanderbloemen for a little over a year now, running our education practice and working with Christian schools as they navigate staffing challenges and just navigating whatever comes their way like this. And so very excited to be working with our schools right now.
Absolutely. And our special guest, let's go back here. There we go. Our special guest today is Dr. Jay Ferguson. We are just honored to have Jay as a part of this webinar. He is a strategic partner of ours and also is one of the most connected thought leaders in Christian education that I know. And Jay, you have been a champion of Vanderbloemen for a long time now, and you are officially a client because we were able to help Grace Community School a few months ago find your development director, Miles, who is on the team and serving the Grace Community school team now. And so we're so excited and for Miles and for you guys, as we know that was a critical hire for you. And thank you for trusting us with that important search. So Jay, you have, as Lynn Swanner said, she might be listening today, you are the poster child for involvement in Christian education. And so you are currently the president-elect of ACSI, Association of Christian Schools International, which is also a client of us here at Vanderbloemen and an amazing network of schools across the globe. We are so thankful for all of the work that ACSI is doing. You're also the past president of Texas Private School Association and still on the board there, as well as the past president for CISA, the Council on Educational Standards and Accountability, and still serve on the board there. The executive director of CISA, Dr. Katie Weens, was a part of this series last week, which you can find on the schoolcovid19.com website. And Jay, you are also on the advisory board for the Center for Christian Education at Baylor University. And we are so excited to have you a part of this. So I would love for you to introduce yourself and share your story for those that are listening today that might not know you.
Yeah, I think Lynn Swanner's actual quote is that I'm the poster child for overcommitment in Christian education. Really very accurate. And I was born with ADD and I probably have never recovered. So I have to always stay busy, which is great for this particular time that we find ourselves in. And I'm like everybody else. I run a Christian school. Grace is a school of about 1,000 kids in kindergarten. We have a junior kindergarten program through 12th grade. And we, like everybody else, found ourselves in a interesting situation in the month of March. I was working on my ministry report for my board, and I was writing to him saying, who knew that at the beginning of March we'd have Go Week and be sending kids all over the country, and at the end of the month we'd be in virtual school and not having kids being sent out of their house. I mean, in 30 days, it's amazing the quantum shift that we've had in Christian schooling, and most of us have converted our schools significantly to basically revamped our whole operational model over the course of just a matter of weeks. It's absolutely remarkable the changes that have happened in Christian schooling and in private schooling over the course of the past just a matter of weeks. And so we're just a kind of a microcosm of that. I said in a blog I wrote recently, even if you had an online platform before you were offering some kind of online education, what we're doing right now in virtual schooling, basically taking the current, what you were currently doing in bricks and mortar school and kind of lifting it from its moorings and setting it in your kid's living room, with everything, with fine arts, with PE and everything else that's involved. It's a whole different thing from doing a couple of online classes. So we're all rookies in this. All of us are, and so we're all learning together. We're all trying to figure it out.
Absolutely. And I just put the link to your blog on the CISA website in the chat feature here. So make sure you click on that. We're going to be diving into that blog a little bit today before we talk about virtual learning. It is one of the best overviews and challenges to Christian educators in this time that I've seen. And so we're so thankful that you wrote that. Jay, can you kind of share a little bit more about Grace, just so as folks are listening, they kind of have a view of what Grace looks like as a school in their minds?
Sure. We're in part of Texas that we just call East Texas. It's a town called Tyler. We're about an hour and 45 minutes east of Dallas, southeast of Dallas. And it's a school that the Lord's allowed us to do some pretty amazing things where we are. Like I said, we have about 1,000 kids, which is, for a city of 100,000 and a county of 250,000, is a pretty large school. And we have a lot of families who are, they're not, it's a pretty economically disparate family community. We're not, we don't really trend high wealth. We don't really trend high the other way either. So we're pretty, we like to say we serve a large cross section of the body of Christ, and we've really tried to be more intentional in doing that over the past several years. And so that's been really, really important to us. A high value for us is community. We place a very, very high value on it. And we spend a lot of time investing deeply in the culture of the school. And we realize that culture drives so many things in the organization, and it drives good, high quality learning. And so we're very, very intentional. We're very, very, sometimes people might say we're even OCD about our quality, about building quality within the school. So it's very, very important to us. So that's just kind of a little bit about who we are and a little bit about what we do.
That's super helpful. And I know, Jay, a personal value of yours is excellence. And we can see that through Grace and your leadership there, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on to talk about virtual learning today, because I'm sure you've learned a lot and made some mistakes and also done some things really well in the last couple of weeks. But before we dive into virtual learning, give us a bit of your opinion. Again, you wrote about this in your blog that I posted in the chat feature. So if everybody wants to pull that up and read that at some point today, but talk to us about, how do you think that education has been impacted and changed forever due to COVID-19?
Yeah, I'll preface it by saying there's a really great article that I think a lot of people have probably in our business have probably read, because it's been circulating like crazy. It's called "Leading Beyond the Blizzard: Why Every Organization is Now a Startup." And if you look at that blog that Holly posted, that I wrote, it's actually referenced in there. And in that article, Andy Crouch and others have said that for nonprofits, COVID-19 is not just a blizzard. It's not just a storm that we're going to have to hunker down and get through, to climb out and get back to business as usual.
I know that's so sweet for y'all to do that, but
we're going to get out and kind of.
I know, and I'm thankful that I didn't feel good about y'all going to the post office so much.
And
good.
I had to get out of.
Okay. Hey, Jay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you're back. It looks like someone else is actually logged in as you.
Oh, is that the problem?
Yes.
I was wondering what that was.
I muted whoever that was, but it does look like.
Okay, I don't know what ended up happening here. That was crazy. Anyway, let me go back and say where I was. But it's not just a blizzard. It's not just a small storm to get through, only to climb out and get back to business as usual. Instead, Crouch has said this is kind of like a 12 to 18 month mini ice age. And that's just going to fundamentally change how nonprofits do business. That's kind of the whole thing that Crouch and others are saying, is that we're just going to have to kind of rewrite our playbook, because so many things are changing about how we're doing everything. I think education has changed, and I don't think it's going back. I think a lot of it's going to look the same. I mean, I don't think everything's going to be different, but I think there are some things that are going to change. As we're converting to virtual schooling, it really forces our teachers and educators to do some things differently. It forces them to really curate their curriculum. You can't do a 45-minute to an hour-long lecture to high school students on Zoom. I mean, if you sat in on a 45 to hour long one person talking on Zoom, it's mind-numbing. especially, and if you're a 16-year-old, you can't do that. So you've got to curate what's important, become fluent in online learning platforms and delivery. You've got to really scale down what you're doing and how you deliver it. So that's really something that teachers are learning how to do and learning how to do well. And I think that that's going to be really, really important for them as they move on to regular brick and mortar classrooms when all this is over. Teachers are going to learn that they're able to do so much more with their students and that they can be so much more efficient with the amount of work that they assign. They're going to have to give kids more projects to do outside of the house and outside of the classroom, because they can't just keep giving kids pen and paper tests in this kind of context, in this virtual schooling context, which I really think is going to pave the way for the practice of service learning and development of service learning. I know that that's a model that is in high application at the college level, not so much in Christian K-12 education, but I think it's really going to pave the way for that a lot more in Christian education. So I think in a lot of ways, this is going to be a real quantum leap for us if we can just learn from what we've been doing and move forward, take the lessons that we've learned and apply them back in the brick and mortar classroom when we get back into it.
Absolutely. And it's going to be really neat to see what teachers really rise to the top, those creative teachers that, their creative juices are flowing right now as they're able to really connect with students and parents in new and creative ways. So to that
I think
point,
you're right.
so go ahead, Jay.
Let me say one more thing about that. I think you're right about the creation, but let me tell you one thing that I'm excited about. There are a lot of more, let's say, seasoned or veteran teachers who didn't think that they were capable of grasping the online learning platforms, only to find out that if you actually throw them in the deep end, they can really do it. And I've been so proud of my teachers who didn't think that they could do it, the fact that they're actually getting in there and doing it. And so they're developing this sense of self-efficacy that I think is really exciting and inspiring. And so it's not just the millennial teachers who the native digital learners. It's the ones who said, I didn't think I could do this, but I'm actually able to do it. And I interrupted you, and I'm sorry, but I just think that's a really good point for people who didn't think they were capable of it, and now they're in that position, and lo and behold, they're learning.
Yep, that's such a good point, Jay, because this crisis has forced all of us, regardless of age or technical ability, to really have to force ourselves to learn new things. And so that's a great point. I love that you brought that up. So to that point, let's dive in a little bit to the economic downturn. You in your article specifically talked about what schools need to be thinking about regarding the economic downturn, because that's a reality that a lot of people on this call today are fearful and scared as they're looking at their budget and aren't sure how they're going to make payroll next month. So can you kind of talk through what you mentioned in your article specifically around the economic downturn?
Absolutely. And I think if the schools out there, like my school, even today, we're getting calls from families who have been laid off. Mom or dad have been laid off. Their work hours have been cut back, and they're already concerned about even their ability to pay tuition for this year heading out, much less where they move from this point moving forward. And so I think there's a lot of concern just economically about where we move forward. And I think that that's something that schools are really going to have to get their arms around, both in the short term and in the long term. I'll say, first of all, in the short term, I think schools need to be thinking about, there's been a ton of stuff out there about, can I raise money in this environment? I don't feel good about it asking people for money right now. Well, I think what I'm seeing kind of in terms of emerging best practices is it's if you have emergency needs, and if you have needs for some families helping others, I think that that's a good thing to be asking families to be a part of and asking families to contribute to. So setting up funds, emergency funds for families to help each other with tuition and for other things, financial aid funds, I think those are good short-term things to be working on, and families helping families. Deferring payment on tuition is another way to come alongside families in the short term. And then in the kind of short, long term, as we look to budgets for next year, I think we all have to take a look at our budgets and at least contingency plan of what would you do if you had a 10 to 30% drop in enrollment over the course of the next school year. What would your budget look like? What kinds of changes would you need to make? Staffing modifications, program modifications, what sort of changes would you need to make? And to have a contingency plan budget in place, I think would be really, really just necessary at this point in time. So I think that those are all kind of short-term modifications and consequences that we need to be considering right now. I think in the longer term, for reasons that I talked about in my blog, and I can go into those if you'd like for me to, I think in the longer term, it really presents some opportunities for Christian schools. And like I said, we can talk about those if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and dive in. I think, let's see, my next slide here. You talked about the 4 things that schools should be doing right now. So if you want to kind of bring those together as far as the opportunities that this offers Christian schools in the long term. And then you mentioned 4 things that schools should keep doing, or if they're not currently doing, should be doing to set them up for long-term success.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we can do is, and I know some schools may be thinking, I'll kind of address this first. I know some schools may be thinking, well, you're a school of 1,000 kids, you're a big school, you've got probably a lot of resources that I don't have. But I think probably what I'd say at this point in time is you probably have more resources than you think, because chances are you have these resources. You have your strong Christian faith. You have a strong school community that loves and cares for each other. And we're all in a position right now where your school families need some things desperately from you. They need support, they need love, and they need you to help inject a degree of normalcy and a degree of routine into the lives of their children. And the way that you do that is some form of schooling. And that schooling may look like, if you have the platforms in place, if you have Google Classroom in place, if you have Zoom in place, Google Meet is a free way of putting meetings and putting recordings in your family's hands. So really your families kind of need 3 things. They need online access, they need a digital device, which can be their phones, and they need supportive families, which really Christian schools have the benefit of their families all having. Other schools don't have that option. So first of all, schools need to be in the business of putting together some form of schooling, and we can talk about what that looks like later. But first of all, schools need to be loving and serving their families well and maximizing learning. We have an opportunity to love our people as an act of worship of the Lord and as a reflection of Christian community in ways that heightens our value proposition and gives glory to God. Teachers and coaches need to reach out to families and kids. You've got hourly staff, you've got people who you are paying hourly, people whose work relies on having kids present inside the building. Those people you can repurpose to be kind of community group leaders. Break up your school families and have those people routinely call and contact school families to see how they're doing. What needs can we meet? What are your prayer requests? And let me pray with you right now. Use that extra bandwidth to help your families. Create conversations using Zoom and otherwise around mental health strategies. Get a school family member who's a licensed professional counselor to talk about how to talk to your kids about the coronavirus and how to have coping strategies in your own home. Really offer prayer services via Zoom and otherwise. There's all kinds of ways to pour into your families to do this. We ought to be doing it better than anybody because we're the church, we're the body of Christ. We ought to do that well. So that's the first thing. Secondly, continuing to move forward with our current budget and plans, as I said a minute ago, but also be building contingency plans to scale down significantly for next year if necessary, and offering things like deferred tuition increases, increased financial aid, and raising emergency aid for families. And so contemplating what those things look like are really important. And we should also be thinking about how to use our new online capacity. If you're doing virtual schooling right now, your teachers now know how to put classes together and to push content out to students in a way that they didn't know how to do before. So how, when we're all back in school again, are you going to leverage that for the benefit of your school? Be thinking about that. Is there a geographic region around your school where it's too far for families to drive, but where your brand still extends? People have heard about you, they know you, they see you as a reputable school, but they won't get in a car and drive 5 days a week to you. Do you have the opportunity to create some online content that you can push out to families who live in those areas and that can take advantage of the benefit of your school and some of its classes, maybe as they're homeschooling their kids or offering an AP class or something like that in ways that you could never do before? That's an opportunity for you to extend your reach, extend your ministry reach beyond the scope of what you're doing right now. So when we're opening brick and mortar school again, you can be a school that has a broader reach and a broader scope than ever before. And maybe God's giving you that opportunity right now. So now's the time to be dreaming and thinking about what that looks like beyond now. And then the last thing is diversity initiatives. You know, there's a tendency, if in your school you've made the attempts to increase your academic, cultural, and economic diversity, you shouldn't lose ground on that. I know there's a natural tendency to say, well, we need to only focus on the families who can pay 100% of the bills right now because we're in lockdown mode. I'd really encourage you to not lose ground gained on diversity initiatives. First, we're Christian schools, and Christian schools should be serving as broad a cross-section of the body as possible. Second, if God's using this moment in history to equip his young church to influence and impact the world, that impact has to be as cross-cultural as necessary. And we have to reach a broad constituency of families in order to do that. And then finally, the question of whether we're going to be mission true or not is not answered when we have all the resources we need. The question of whether we're mission or true or not is when times get tough. Do we maintain our mission? Do we stay true to it? And if you're called to increase, to reach a broader cross-section of the body of Christ, that is true in good times and in tough times. So you got to stay the course on that. And that's a lot, but those are the things, the four things that I think schools really need to be focused on right now.
Jay, I just so appreciate the challenge, the hopeful challenge that you are sharing with all of us right now, because there's a lot of folks that are listening today that probably feel so overwhelmed that they're just trying to get through today. But to challenge all of us to really be on our feet before the Lord, or on our knees, sorry, before the Lord's feet, lay it all down, and just to realize that we were called to this, and that it is not easy. But if the Lord has called us to this, that we have got to step up to this, and rise to the challenge. And those 4 things that you display in your article, I love your heart for diversity. We share that at Vanderbloemen, and your continued efforts to be a thought leader on that and continue to press the Christian world in general, both churches and schools, forward in that, even amidst this hard, difficult time where it'd be easy to put that to the wayside. To continue to bring it to the forefront is so inspiring. Want to encourage everybody to continue to bring your questions forward. We've already got a couple from Glenn and Megan that we're definitely going to get to. So continue to encourage everybody to post your questions there. Brian, anything you have to add before we hop into specifically best practices around virtual learning?
Yeah, just one thing I want to basically just echo the first point that Jay made, because I've been on the phone a lot with Christian schools over the last week and a half. And one of the things I keep saying is, now is the time to be out there as the city on the hill right now, right? To be the witness, one, for Christ and his name and the spread of the gospel right now. I mean, that's a command. And we can do that as school leaders and as Christian families, as a part of our Christian schools, for our neighbors, for those in need right now. And our schools continuing to care and almost doubling down. I know that everybody's exhausted. It's like, well, we have a little bit more free time, but not, why am I so busy right now working from home and doing these things? But it's time to double down on our excellence and the quality of education that we're providing, because one, that is what we're called to do and what our families need, our kids need. But also, as we think forward about how, will we see enrollment dips? Will we see enrollment increases? I think there will be families that are part of a public school system that look and say, wow, look how the local Christian school responded so quickly and cared for their families in the midst of a crisis. I think I want to be a part of that. And so, one, a witness for Christ, but also a witness to what our schools can do in the midst of crisis.
Yeah. I think that's really well said, Brian. And the thing that I would reinforce what you're saying on that, one of the things I'd reinforce on what you're saying on that is, I think all of us, we're not right this second. I don't think any of us are looking to make a bunch of big changes in our lives. I don't think we want a ton of instability or change. And I think that's true for a lot of our families right now. Even if some of our families were thinking, hey, I think I'll change schools. I think I'll send my kids to a different school right now. If you're loving your families well, if you're pouring into them well, you may have a lot of families who say, hey, we are not changing horses in midstream if we can at all avoid it. And so the big question comes, can you work with them and help them financially to keep them at your school? And if you can, then you'll save those families. So to reinforce Brian's point, I think he's exactly right.
That's great. Thank you both for those inspiring and encouraging thoughts. Let's dive into virtual learning best practices, because we've got a couple questions coming in specifically about leading remote teams and virtual learning. So Jay, a couple weeks ago, your team started diving in and saying, all right, how do we do this and how do we do it as well as we can? So can you talk us through what you've learned as you've migrated Grace to virtual learning?
Well, I think some of the main things, or some of the big things, are you have to get, this is so obvious that it's almost a dumb thing, but you have to get creative. You have to think about, what were we doing before that we have to do in a whole different way now? And you have to think about that proactively too. If you were doing, in Texas, the governor just closed schools until May 4th. And so we have to be thinking, even though May 4th doesn't include things for us like senior walk and graduation and things like that, we have to be thinking, how do we do a graduation ceremony practicing social distancing? How do we do senior walk doing practicing social distancing? But it's not just those big things. It's how do I do PE for my fourth graders every day, using doing these things? Because really the reality is you don't just want to say, well, I'm just going to strip it down to the bare essentials. It's just going to be reading and writing and arithmetic, and I'm just going to give them my core product. If you can avoid it, if that's all you can do, then absolutely that is what you should be doing, and you should be doing that with excellence. And so that's a great thing. And so I'm not denigrating that at all. In fact, if that's what you're giving them, and that at this moment in time, you're giving them more than probably what 90% of kids in America are getting right now. So kudos to you, and you should be proud of yourself, and you should give them the very best of that you possibly can. So if all you're doing is taking packets or giving delivery packets to them, and you're not doing anything digital whatsoever, just make sure those delivery packets are tied directly to the curriculum that you have been giving them for the past 9 months, that you're assessing them on that curriculum, and that you're taking them to a predefined course for the end of the school year, and you're doing better than 90% of schools in America. I mean, so kudos to you. And so don't be discouraged because I don't have all this fancy technology equipment. Just stay the course. But if you do have some technology equipment, if you can replicate PE, if you can replicate your fine arts program, you really should, because what you need to do is think about creatively, how do I replicate as much of what I'm doing and give my kids, in our case, the full Grace experience, or the full, ex-Christian school experience as I possibly can, and put that in the lives of my kids. And so that's number one, get creative. Number two is stay connected. When you're leading your teams, it's so much harder to do it virtually than it is when you're there. One of the problems with virtual learning is, I think God made us for incarnational presence, meaning that when I'm sitting, Brian's been in my office, there is a way that I connect to Brian when he is physically at my table that I can't connect to him when he's sitting, when we're doing what we're doing right now. That's why Brian came to see me as my Vanderbloemen consultant, because he knew he had to be physically with me to make that connection. That's really hard when you're leading your team virtually. So you've got to bend over backwards to contact them individually and together more often. We have a 15-minute stand-up meeting with all of my staff first thing in the morning. We didn't make it up. That's a Lencioni thing, but we do it every single morning, just because I want to lay eyes on them. I want to ask how they're doing. I want to check on them. I want to know what's going on, and I want to pray with them every single morning, just before we start our day. So that's really, really important. So get creative and stay connected. And then the third thing is, you've got to be kind of the symbolic leader of the organization right now in a way that you never have been before. You've got to lead incarnationally and communicate well. People are looking to you. They really probably were not looking as much to the head of school before, but they need somebody to speak words of life into them right now. They need someone to encourage them right now. They need someone to tell them that everything's going to be okay. And as the leader of the school, you have to be that person. And so it's really, really important that you do that. And it's really, really important that you do it often.
That's great. Jay, a couple of technical questions. What programs or technology are you guys using to facilitate the online learning?
We were in the high school, not in the other grades. In the high school, we were a one-to-one, had gone to one-to-one. And so we were using Google Classroom as our platform for that, which was really, so it was helpful for us because it made the conversion relatively easy to just push it down into the other grades. So Google Classroom's the platform that we use primarily to push our content out. We use for meetings and recordings, we use primarily Google Meet, which is a new Google product. They used to use, as you guys know, it used to be Hangout, but they just rewrote it and it's now Meet, which is great. It allows you to set up meetings with your kids, but it also allows you to record lessons and things like that as well. And so those are kind of our big ones. We've started using Webinar for big gatherings. We don't use it very often. Zoom Webinar for our big gatherings. We don't use it very often because we don't need to pull that many people together very often. So mostly it's Google Classroom and then a lot of times, or sometimes about once a week at the elementary, parents will come in an orderly fashion to maintain social distancing and pick up a packet that has manipulatives in it and things like that that the kids will need for the week. So they still do that as well.
That's great. What technology are you using for your stand-up meeting each day with teachers? Is that through Google Meet or through Zoom?
That's with my leadership team. Okay. I meet with my leadership team, and then my leadership team, like the principals, have regular faculty meetings with their faculty. And yeah, we do use Zoom for that.
That's great. A couple of questions that are coming in before we move on, because I want to spend time specifically on virtual learning, and then we're going to shift to virtual leading. But a couple of questions on how how you guys are communicating with parents. Okay, so here's one from Dwayne. How do you gauge communication to parents? Are you sending guidelines to your team on how many emails a day? Are you funneling that all through the communications department? How are you guys, because you guys are a large school, it's a lot of families. How are you handling that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The classroom communication has to be teacher to parent and teacher to student. Obviously, we don't want to monitor or over monitor or control that. As to building to teacher, we try to, building to parent, we try to modulate that. Principals are pretty much try to keep their connection or their communication to parents to just once or twice a week. And then all school communication is routed through the communications office. So Carolyn and I, that's my communications director. Carolyn and I look at everything that goes out to all of our school just to maintain mission clarity, mission consistency, and to kind of schedule those communications out to make sure we're not drowning our families in stuff. It's okay to communicate more. I think it's okay to communicate more via email now than it was before, just because that's the only way we can communicate with them. But you still have to be careful not to inundate them.
Yeah.
And that's an art. That's an art.
Yeah. Can I add one thing? So I think I mentioned this last week on our webinar with Katie. We were talking about parent communication, and many of the people tuned in are probably parents themselves trying to navigate their own in-house learning for their own children. I know I am. And one of the things my wife and I keep facing is, okay, there's all sorts of questions we have, and our kids have multiple teachers. And so I would say for schools, Christian schools can do this really well because typically we're a little smaller in size. At least I echo everything Jay said. monitor your regular communications, encourage teachers to regularly communicate with their students and their parents, but then create a hub or a temporary landing page on your website that parents can go to, make it an FAQ page, give them at least, if there a general email or a phone number they can call with any question that they're not sure who to go to, they're not sure if it should be a teacher, so that they have that one central place to go to, and that will speak volumes to your parents. And then get, like Jay's been saying, get creative. If you want to host a once a week, message from the head, or kind of a Zoom conference call where any parent could pipe in on a Friday morning and hear from the head and ask questions. Get creative with what works in your culture, because parents are looking for, one, the connection, and two, just to be resourced to keep doing what they're doing in their homes right now. That's
so true. And Jay, Glenn has a question. How are you taking the temperature of your families remotely?
We, as I said before, we've basically divided out our hourly staff amongst our school families. They've kind of adopted. We took the school family list and we split it up and gave each one of our hourly folks a group of families, and said, these are your families. For all intents and purposes, this is your community group. You're going to contact them once a week or once every 10 days, check up on them, see how they're doing. And so they are a point of reference for us as to how our families are doing. We've got, to Brian's point, we've got places on our website that say, if you have financial concerns, here's who you can contact. If you have IT problems, here's who you can contact. Each one of our teachers have what we call, quote, virtual office hours, where they can go in, teachers can go in and talk to, parents can go in and talk to the teachers. We have our teachers reaching out and contacting parents and kids. So with all of these, and I'm just kind of spot contacting parents periodically. So with all of these mechanisms, I feel like we have a pretty good feel on where our parents are. And frankly, I've got more parents reaching out to me now than I did before.
Absolutely. Let's jump into leading remote teams. And I just want to spend a couple minutes on this, Jay, because you've touched on this already, and we've still got several questions that I want to make sure we get to. So you talked about your every morning, your stand-up meeting with your leadership team. Any other wisdom for principals or heads of schools or administrators that are listening today that feel a little bit lost on how to guide or connect with their team virtually?
Yeah, I think I've in addition to having those stand-up meetings, I have moved I used to have a kind of an every other week leadership team meeting, and I moved that to every week, just because I think, again, we need to connect more, we need to talk more, and we need to troubleshoot issues along the way, because again, we're all rookies at this. We're all learning. And we've got things that we didn't anticipate, things that we didn't understand. Here's a classic example. We told all of our teachers, hey, you need to stay a week ahead on the curriculum. In other words, you need to be preparing all of your lessons and all of your recordings and everything else for next week, this week, okay? The spirit of what we were asking them to do is stay ahead, not to be preparing the night before for tomorrow's lesson, but a lot of them were taking that literally and thinking, I've got to do everything this week and this, and it was killing them. And so we had to kind of back up and say, no, this is the spirit of what we were saying, but we weren't communicating that very well. And so what we were saying to them is, you're all first year teachers and teaching in a new school, but you know what? We're all first year leaders in leading a new school. So you've got to understand we're kind of building the plane in midair as well. So If we tell you something and we have to come back and say, hey, let's try this instead, just know it's maximum flexibility. We're all learning this together. And so I think that's an important thing that we're meeting often, because all of these issues are new issues for us. And to just build a spirit of flexibility in your staff. From a leadership standpoint, the other huge advantage here that we have is, I think we all know that educators and education tends to be, on the most part, a group that, if on the continuum of fixed mindset over here and growth mindset over here, probably a little bit more fixed mindset. I mean, just on the whole, in all fairness, we have an opportunity to really push the continuum over towards growth mindset, because we're all in growth mindset mode right now. And so all of those aspects of growth mindset, of being continual learners, of being flexible, of being able to make changes and modifications, pushing that out to your leaders, to your teachers, and trying to change that mindset from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset is going to reap from, I mean, you don't have to be a brilliant leader to figure out how that's going to reap tremendous rewards for you down the road, and for your people down the road when we're back in brick and mortar land, if we can do that now.
Absolutely.
And Brian, would you agree with that, Brian? I think Brian was going to.
Absolutely. The first vice president I ever worked for, he would always say, "Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not break." And you're right. In education, we've often been a little more fixed mindset, and I think right now we have to be more flexible than we've ever been and push towards growth mindset. I think leading right now, just a couple of thoughts. Communication is at a premium. I echo Jay's thought there. I have to give this quote credit to William Vanderbloemen. He and I were on a call with a client just recently, and he said, certainty is an invaluable commodity right now in the midst of uncertainty. And so as a leader, find those things you can be certain about. Yes, we're all learning through this, and we're facing unprecedented times daily, and things are changing rapidly. But what are those things we can be certain of? One, the promises of the scriptures, and we just keep going back to that, back to that, back to that. And then, like Jay said, we're going to be okay. Things are going to look different, but we're going to be okay, and be that steadfast leader right now. And then just for your teams, small gestures are going to go a long way. As far as I can tell, the mail is still working. Even just write handwritten notes and send them in the mail to your key leaders or your team members. Pay attention to birthdays right now. Those things are going to be huge as we deal with the malaise we're in. So.
Nope. Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is what I get for trying to use awesome technology. I think they just died. Okay, that was beautiful, Brian. Okay, we have a couple of questions left. I want to remind everybody before you get off this call, I have my email here, holly@vanderbloemen.com. I am volunteering. I am volunteering Brian's time right now. He's been spending a lot of time just praying for our schools. And so if you need anything, you need somebody to talk to, Brian would love to be that resource for you. Promise, this is not a sales pitch or anything. It's just a time for us to be able to be with you and pray for you. So email me and I can help you set that up. Jay, couple quick things, quick answer. What are your virtual office hours for teachers?
They vary from teacher to teacher, but it's usually in the morning. It's usually from 8 to 9 o'clock in the high school. And that's only because that was a tutorial period for us in brick and mortar high school. Yeah. And then it's a little later in the afternoon for the younger families.
Okay, and then we have a question here. We might not be able to go into super detail on this, but this is a school in California, K through 12, 700 students. Megan's question is, what are you doing about tuition and parents who are saying that they should receive a discount because their students are home rather than being at school? Have you had to navigate that yet?
Can I pitch another organization's webinar?
Yes.
Okay. If you'll go to acsi.org and look on their coronavirus resources, I was a part of a webinar this time last week that addressed that did a whole hour on that entire issue. Awesome. And you can have exhaustive treatment of that issue if you go over to their website and pull it up.
And ACSI is publishing fantastic resources right now. If you go to schoolcovid19.com, scroll down under, I think it's partner resources, that page on ACSI's website is right there. So that'll be an easy way to find it. Click that and you can find that webinar that Jay is referring to. Okay, let's see. This one is also maybe another tough one from Julie. We have heard that public schools in Texas are giving students pass-fail on courses. Some are concerned that this will affect our typical juniors as they compete for college slots next year. Any thoughts on how private schools are handling the grading piece?
Well, my thought is stay consistent on the grading piece rather than go to pass-fail, just because I think that it's going to benefit our kids down the road. If you look at that blog piece in the CISA schools, I think that what specifically in Texas, but even more broadly nationwide, if you look at what private schools are doing right now over the course between now and the end of the school year versus what other schools are able to do, and that's really not a knock on the individual school leaders, it's just the two competing systems. The abilities that we have right now, the advantages that we have as a private school, really put our students at an advantage that other school students aren't going to be at down the road. And I think as much as we can keep the ground that we've gained and help our kids gain more ground, it's not only going to help them at the college admissions from the college admissions standpoint, because college admissions officers aren't stupid. They're going to know that difference. They're going to get it this time next year. Not only that, but once the students get into college, there's going to be a marked difference. This is probably going to show up on SATs and ACTs, but it definitely will in terms, I suspect, in terms of college preparation, especially for juniors this time next year.
That's great, Jay. And I'll end with this. We had a couple questions about that you already shared a little bit about this, but how do you try to raise morale for your teachers who are working overtime, as we all are, during this time? And Dwayne shared separately that they sent their teachers, they have 50 of them, $25 DoorDash cards for food delivery. So not all schools will be in a financial situation to be able to do something like that, but even if it's $5 or $10, just thinking creatively about how to support your staff and your teachers during this time, which goes back to Jay's encouragement to all of us at the very beginning of this call, which is we have got to be leaders that can stand in the gap during this time. And so, Jay, we are so thankful for you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And we're just so grateful you're a partner of ours and are cheering you on from the sidelines. And so we'll post the replay to this, everybody, on schoolcovid19.com. So make sure you check that out. You can also find the link to our Facebook page. I got a couple questions about CARES Act, and unfortunately we can't answer those on this call, but we will be doing that at 1 p.m. Central Time on our Facebook. So you can check that out at schoolcovid19.com. All right. Thanks so much, Jay.
You bet. My pleasure. Thanks a bunch.